Hummingbird 1. When Toad met Snake, they chuckled. Neither feared the other, neither cared for the other. They played side by side. Venom bound their friendship. When they saw Hummingbird looking at Half Moon, they planned to topple him, made a pact as tight as a gourd to bind loose vines into a snare. They invited Hummingbird to a party full of jam-tart sweet nectar and coral bells, told him how fine his ruby red throat shone in the sun. Come sing, said Snake, who could turn words inside out. Come eat, spat Toad, soaking his victim like rain. When Hummingbird was sipping butterfly bush juice, Snake said his wings needed preening. Toad agreed. Hummingbird had never been told this before. They fetched their tools, sharpened them whilst he sang, told Hummingbird to spread wings so they could see his beauty, promised to leave them splendid and smooth, then sliced them clean, dragged them to the edge of the forest, buried them under mouldy stench, left Hummingbird to wither like leaves in putrid pool. Without wings, Hummingbird was mute, his beauty gone, his song like a prayer gone. Snake and Toad chuckled.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, thank you. So, hi, Panya. It's really nice of you to come and talk to us. How are things going? Are you managing to get much writing done?
Yes, I am actually. I mean, lockdown doesn't work. Social distancing isn't working for everyone, and I can understand. But for me, this is my utopia. It really is. Yeah. I mean, as poets and as writers working in the community and wider, we're expected to be social beings. But I realised that I very much like my own company, and it makes me happy. So yes, yeah, I'm doing well.
Good, that's brilliant. Okay, so when and how did you first find out you were a writer? How did you know?
Well, that's always a tricky one, because I think it's always very difficult to pinpoint that moment. So if we're talking about when I actually formally said, okay, I'm a writer, then we're looking at the late 80s, early 90s. But I believe that writing seed was planted much before that. I used to love reading. I mean, I still do, but I loved reading as a child, which I think is, the preliminary background for becoming a writer. I used to write play scripts for my younger siblings as well, and get them to act it out or else feel my wrath. So those were all things in the making of becoming a writer, really. But in terms of formally actually saying, yes, I am a writer, late 80s, early 90s for that. So.
And how did that come about? How did you sort of manage to say to yourself, yes, I am a writer? Was there something that told you?
Again, it's there's not one answer, or it's not one stimulus. It's a whole range of things. One, I felt I had something to say and I wanted to say it. And I felt being a performance poet would give me the platform to do that. The other thing was, and people never believe this when I say it, but I was really shy. I was absolutely, standing up in front of an audience filled me with terror. My voice would be quivering, my hands would be shaking, I'd be coming out in a hot sweat. And because I knew I had something to say, and I wanted to stand in front of public and speak, I knew that poetry or performance poetry would be one of the things that would allow me to confront that fear and put me in front of people so that they could judge my words. I mean, crazy. So there was that too. But also, I think it's fun to, you know, put words together and then perform that for an audience, and even better when the audience is appreciative of your efforts too. I haven't yet been tomatoed or egged in any performance, but I really do get a buzz from sharing my work, and it's a really nice thing to do, and a privileged thing to do as well.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's something that some writers acknowledge and some don't, but I reckon even those who are scared to stand up and perform their work actually get a buzz when it's appreciated.
Yeah, so, you know, you can do a performance. Obviously, I haven't done any performances, live performances during lockdown, but you come away from that on such a high, and that high can last for days. You know, it's fabulous.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about it that way, because there's the whole slightly controversial performance versus page poetry approach. But I mean, your poetry reads like page poetry, and you perform it brilliantly. And it sounds to me like it's the words that matter, and you're performing because that's a way to get your words out to a wide audience. Would that be fair to say, do you think?
I've always been interested in bridging that gap between page and stage, because there is a distinct difference, or at least I believe there is a difference. And I've always wanted my work to be able to be translated on both forms. I think in most cases I've done that. I think you can read it on the page and you can get something from that, but you can get something more from a live performance, because then you're getting my intonation, you're getting my gestures, and you're getting all of that, my expressions and everything with that as well. So, you know, there's a double benefit, but yeah, I've always been interested in being able to have my work stand up in both arenas. And when I write, I think about how it looks as well as how it sounds.
Yeah, I think you've been pretty successful at that. I mean,
Thank you.
You certainly don't come across as a performance poet who can't actually write, who relies on the performance. So, you know, you come across as somebody who really works hard on the words. So, yeah. So what are you writing at the moment?
Okay, so I mentioned that I am a PhD researcher at Nottingham University. I'm in my second year. It's a critical creative PhD, so I'm doing cultural studies and mapping the history of Black writing here in Nottingham from the 1950s onwards. But also there's a practice element to that, and I'm creating a collection of poetry. So the collection working title is called Journey of the Archivist, because I am an archivist. I founded Nottingham Black Archive 11 years ago, and there's so much information in the archive that hasn't been mined. I've been so busy collecting that I haven't had the time to scrutinize it. So this PhD is giving me the time to scrutinize what's in the archive, then be inspired by it and write poetry from it. And I'm about a third of the way through the poetry collection at the moment. So I've still got some ground to cover.
But you're obviously finding it easy to do that during lockdown. I mean, I know I've spoken to quite a few poets who say, I can't go and sit in a cafe and write. I can't write anymore, but you're not having that sort of problem.
No, I'm not. I mean, I wouldn't write a poem in a cafe because there's too much external distraction. What I would do in a cafe is, once I've written that poem, go and sit down and read it in that environment, and then do my tweaks. So there is a place for cafes in my process, but not for writing. For writing, I tend to write in the evening, and I tend to write curled up on my settee with my TV on mute, but also that the visuals there in the background. And so lockdown, it hasn't really changed that for me. And there's just so much stimulus as well. So what I have to do is be mindful of staying on track with the theme of my collection and not going off track and writing isolated lockdown poems.
Yeah. Does that frustrate you sometimes that you can't just sort of grab an idea out of the air and follow it and see where it goes?
Yes, it really did at the beginning, but I have to say I'm doing a little bit of cheating because I am using what's happening as a bit of a stimulus. So it is woven in there, but not explicitly so. So, but yeah, I do find there's times where I want to go off track and write something away from my research.
Yeah,
I don't feel at this point that I can afford the time to do that. So I'm being disciplined.
I'm very impressed. So it sounds like it's probably made you a bit more productive being sort of shut in a house and not having the option to go out and perform and having more of an opportunity to write. Have there been any sort of unusual aspects of the COVID-19 situation and the lockdown that might have struck you in and kind of taken you along a direction that you might not have gone?
Yes, nature. I'm ashamed to say nature. And I think a lot of people have engaged with nature at this point. Prior to lockdown, my life was hectic, absolutely ridiculous. And lockdown has made me actually evaluate that. And I'm not going back to that pace. And so I've been able to take walks. I didn't even realize I lived so close to the River Leen, and I'm ashamed to say that. And it's a beautiful space. So I take regular walks along the River Leen and look at the ducks and the geese and, all of the wildlife of many different birds, and just watching the river flow and sitting down. And I kind of like nature. And I've got a good sized back garden that I do nothing with except cut the grass. And I'm beginning to imagine what this space can be, and thinking, I haven't done it yet, I'm thinking about planting, vegetables and so on. And that side of me is something new. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And I guess when you discover something like that, it just can't help but percolate into your poetry somehow.
Yes, yeah, because I've always been a little bit squeamish about, spiders and insects and stuff. But I'm actually finding I have.
Me too.
But I'm actually finding I'm not so worried about that now. I'm able to deal with it and not freak out.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Actually, I'm going to nip back because there was a question I wanted to ask when you were talking about the poems you're writing for your PhD. The sort of overarching theme is journey of an archivist.
Yes.
Are there any sort of themes within that come out from the actual archive itself and the material that you're using for a starting point? Are there any common themes?
Yes, so this is where I get serious then and say, with the collection, what I'm doing is I guess I'm writing my story of why I felt it was necessary to have a resource like Nottingham Black Archive here in the city. So I'm having to pull up those emotions of being dissatisfied with the heritage sector here in Nottingham. So we're going back to 2007 when the idea for the archive began to percolate. And we see this being played out now with what has happened with George Floyd, and bringing to the fore the disparity in opportunity, the way mainstream institutions construct a narrative that excludes groups of people. And so the whole premise for the archive was because I felt, and I'd also researched as part of my MA in Museum Studies, I did some research as well, that the Black history wasn't being documented in a thoughtful way. It was being documented in the usual stereotypical manner, or, you know, so there would be something about slavery, but there's much more to Black history than slavery. You know, those are the themes that are coming out in the poetry. So, you know, it's going to be hard hitting. It's going to be hard hitting things that I'm finding in the archive. You know, here in Nottingham, we had the colour bar. So we're looking at what it, you know, because I'm looking at the 1950s period, we're talking about when the Windrush generation came and what they experienced here, specifically in this city, in terms of housing, education, employment. So it's quite gritty. It's going to be hard hitting. But that's what I like.
It sounds like the sort of thing a lot of people ought to be reading, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, as a white person, I find it really awkward to talk about the whole Black Lives Matter thing, because I don't know what it's like. I am an ally. I'm very strongly in support of it, but I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know how to write about it. I don't know how to read about it. So I think the sort of work that you're doing, which gives some of the background and puts things into context, and makes things specific as well, is really important. I mean, would you see it like that, or is it more, this is an area you want to write about and that's why you're writing about it?
No, I absolutely agree. I'm, you know, through my poetry, I'm exploring a whole range of things. I'm exploring institutions and the people within those institutions as well. You know, the role of a historian, the role of the curator, the kind of narrative that they perpetuate. You know, I always believe my poetry is for everyone. You know, Black people will be able to you know, get something from it in terms of, I can relate to this experience, I can relate to this. White people will get from it, well, I didn't realize this was happening. Okay, you've raised my awareness on this. I now know about this. I hadn't considered this before. So my poetry, you know, it is, and I always design it so that it is actually for everyone. And you know, and I suppose more specifically for Nottingham as well, so that people can have an awareness of what it is like for somebody like me, who is from the Windrush generation, but I was born during the Windrush era. However, I wasn't one who came across. I was born here in Nottingham, and my generation were always asked, where are you from? And people never actually associate the fact that actually we're from here. This is where there was this whole wave in the 60s of children being born here and going through the education system and facing a lot of hostility and discrimination because we were different and because the system wasn't set up to deal with us and to understand our differences, understand our cultural differences. So, you know, it's timely in that sense, because, you know, everything with the Windrush is now in the public domain, but it's also timely in terms of what's happening with George Floyd and the whole Black Lives Matter movement, in terms of, I guess, giving voices like mine, which are usually unheard, a space, and to open up dialogue.
I think that's the most important thing, isn't it? And there's no point in people talking at each other, but if you can, through your performances and your poems, actually discuss things with people, which I think you do really well. You sort of, when I read your poems, it comes across more like, well, this is what I think the case is. This is how I think things are. What do you think? And have you thought about thinking about it slightly differently? Do you know what I mean? That's kind of the impression I get from your poetry. It's challenging, but it's not it's constructively challenging.
Yeah, I don't like to be on the nose, and that's how I see it. When I'm writing, I don't like to be on the nose. I have a poem called "They and Them," and I like people to pull from it their own meaning. I don't want to be force feeding people with this is what you need to think. And yeah, and I do like dialogue. I think that's why I write, so that we can have discussions about some of the themes that I pull out.
Excellent. So who would you say inspires you? Not necessarily a writer, just anyone who you find inspirational.
Well, one of the people that inspire me is Bernadine Evaristo.
Yeah.
She inspires me because I know that she has had a long, hard struggle to get where she is today, and she has shown determination. And so she's definitely one of the people that inspired me. And I had the privilege, before she became a Booker Prize winner, I had the privilege of supporting her at a performance here in Nottingham. And that was fantastic. And especially for someone like me as a Black woman to be able to sit and hear another Black woman talk about her experience, her writing process, her work. When she did that was probably about 18 months ago when she came to Nottingham, around about the time. For me, that was just like, it was a fantastic experience. And it also brought to the fore how little of that I actually get in my career as a writer. You know, it's not very often I get to see somebody who looks like me and has excelled and have the opportunity to actually be in conversation with that person. So in a professional way, Bernadine Evaristo inspires me. But also, I have 6 grandchildren, and they inspire me all the time. You know, and everything that I do for them.
Yeah.
Do for them. So yeah, they do. I love their life, their energy for life. I love the questions that they ask me. I love their honesty as well, because they'll tell me straight.
Yes.
You know, many won't, but they'll tell me straight, like, no, grandma, that doesn't look good, or no, grandma, why are you doing that? So yeah, they're a great source of inspiration.
Yeah, and it's about building a future, isn't it? It's about making the world that we've got now into something that we want our children and grandchildren to grow up in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What are you most proud of in your writing career?
I'm most proud of still being here as a writer, because the writer's journey for any writer can be a difficult one.
Yeah.
In terms of opportunities, in terms of learning your craft, in terms of getting the right feedback, and so on. So when you add to that other elements like being Black and the lack of opportunities that comes to somebody like me. So when I think about my early career here in Nottingham, it's pretty dire, really. But what it has taught me along the road of struggling as a writer, it's taught me resilience, and it's taught me determination. And so the thing I'm most proud of is that I'm still writing. I'm still writing after, lack of opportunity, setbacks. We had the recession in 2008, which was horrendous time, because that's when doors were closed, and that's when people supported their cliques, and I'm not part of a clique. I'm very much on the outside, but the fact that I'm still writing, that I've had my first collection of poetry published through Burning Eye Books, that I'm still able to perform on the circuit. I still get booked to do workshops and things like that. I'm proud of that.
Yeah. And I think throughout it all, you've managed to stay yourself as a writer.
Yeah.
You haven't had to, or felt you had to bow to any idiot conventions or whatever. So yeah, I think you're right to be proud of that, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely, because you see writers coming through and they take on this voice that they think is the voice of a writer. But the voice you hear is my voice. It's me. This is me, warts and all. Take me or leave me. But I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change.
And it's genuine, you know, it comes across as that, you know, I really mean what I'm saying, whereas people who write what they think the audience wants to hear, you know, the audiences can tell. And the fact that you're still getting booked to perform and teach is a great credit to you.
And can you imagine, because my work is quite hard hitting, political poetry, if you want to put a tag on it. If you can imagine 20 years ago, the things that I was writing then, it wasn't received well. It wasn't received, you know, people would say, you're moaning, or why are you talking about inequality and discrimination for? It's a lot more trendy now to write political poetry and to be political, as we can see. But I was doing it at a time when actually you wouldn't get bookings because no one would want to hear you talking about racial discrimination. But I kept on through. I kept on through that because it was important to me.
Yeah, no, I think you're right to be proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's next? What do you hope to achieve in the future?
Well, I need to finish this PhD. So I've got a year and 3 months left on it. When I say it like that, it's scary. Finish the PhD, get that collection of poetry together, and continue to work. I want to branch out into playwriting more, so that's something that I've been dabbling with. So I've written a couple of play scripts, and I'd like to explore some different genres. They say we've all got a novel inside us. I want to put that to the test.
Okay.
See if I can do that. I'd like to also write some children's fiction as well. I've got lots of ideas there as well. So just continuing to write, but experiment and having fun at the same time as well.
Good. That is one of the most important things. Yeah. Definitely. Okay. So have you got a short poem to read us out with, please?
I have indeed, and I hope it is short. It is short. So because I started with Hummingbird 1, I thought I'd read the second one, so you can see. And then there's a third, but I'm not going to read that. So if people are interested in that, then of course they can buy the book. So
from 5 Leaves.
From 5 Leaves, absolutely. So this is Hummingbird 2. So if you remember in 1, Snake and Toad dismembered Hummingbird's wing. So this is what happens. So before Hummingbird shrouded himself in undergrowth, before he asked why Snake and Toad had dismembered his wings, before he accepted he would be food for sharp-shinned hawks soon, very soon, even before his courage sunk like filthy swamp and drifted down, Ant, red as berry, crawled onto Hummingbird's back and measured the wound, and said the oracle had sent her to find him under weeping tree, sent her to bathe bloodied stumps in dew-soaked leaves, sent her to make wings new again. Hummingbird listened, but could not speak. Between the shadows, Ant called friends to find reeds and plants and gum, and day after day they plaited and poked stems through holes, used tree bark and root and sap, entreated orb web spider to bring diaphanous thread with a playful soul, and he spun fan-shaped wings with sticky strands beaded, not smooth, and they covered the bark and the roots and the twigs, and after spider twisted fine cords of fibre into thoughtful grace. And when they had made wings, long and elegant as nectar jewel, they fitted them at midnight beside the river that ran through towns, fixed them tight, held Hummingbird still. And when Moon had slept twice, they formed a circle, and Ant said, it is time. Hummingbird spread wings and fluttered. Voice staccato at first. He hovered and stuttered, voice shrill. He soared and muttered, and higher he flew until the rattle became a splendid baritone, then vanished with a zip. Ant called after him, "What will you do now you are new again?" Hummingbird chuckled.
Oh, that's lovely. That's amazing. There's just so many phrases in there I just wanted to pick out and pin up on my wall. Anyway, thank you so much for agreeing to let us interview you, and we will hopefully see you in the bookshop soon.
Yes, very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.